So originally I was going to do this on Sunday. I've said in my last power rankings that I was going to do a video where I would take a look at all 23 teams and taking a look how they have done throughout the quarter mark of this season. But it turns out that next week we have some midweek games, and because I have to do that preview on the midweek games on Sunday night, and also have to do the power rankings and the review of match week number 10, I just thought that there was just no time for me to actually do this video. Plus, the fact that next week I'm going to be also very busy. I'm actually only about 10 days away from the final exam, and that's when it gets really tough for me to make some video. And yeah, and I had time to kill tonight, so that's another reason why I decided to do it today. But yeah, let's get started, shall we? We're going to go alphabetical order. And we start with Atlanta, who is currently second in the East. They have a record of 6-1-1. They currently have 19 points. Their highest power rankings is first, and the lowest on the power ranking is 10th. And the average they are in terms of the power rankings is 3.2. And actually, I forgot to pull this up, but another thing that I will also talk about in this video is that I'm going to be also talking about how each team has gone in terms of the first 9 weeks. So I'm going to basically tell you guys where each team was in the first 9 weeks of the power rankings, and that includes the pre-season one, which I did. So Atlanta, they start the season they start the season on third of the power rankings. And actually, let me just put this a little bit more bigger because I can't really quite see. But yeah, they start third in the power rankings, then they move down to 10th, which is the lowest, on week 1, and then they move up to 6th on the second week, move up to number 3 in the third week, move up to number 2 on week number 5. They stay the same on week 4, and then they moved up to number 1 for the first time in week number 6, then moved down to number 2 in week 7, then moved back up to week 1 for week 8 and week 9, and that's where they are right now. They're currently first in the current day power rankings. And Atlanta has been pretty consistent this year in terms of the power rankings. They're one of the best team, if not the best team in the league, and the only reason why their power rankings, their averages, I wouldn't say it's pretty high, but I would say that it could be definitely lower than this if they did not lose that 4-0 game on opening weekend against Houston. They probably would have an average like right around where NYCFC is right here at 1.9, which, a little bit spoiler alert, this is actually the lowest in terms of the power ranking average. But yeah, next up, Chicago, who are currently 7th place. They have a record of 2-2-3. They have 8 points this season. The highest they have gone in the power rankings is 12. The lowest was 22nd, and the average is dead on at 17. So the Fire started the pre-season power rankings at 12th, which turns out to be the highest they were in this power rankings throughout the first 9 weeks, and then they dropped down to 14th in week 1, then dropped down to 16 in week 2, and then dropped all the way down to 21st in week 3. They moved up one spot from 21st to 20th from week 4 and week 5, and they moved up to 15th in week 6, then dropped all the way back down to 22nd in week 7, which is the lowest they have gone in the power rankings, and then in week 8 they moved up to 16, and now at present day in the power rankings they're currently 14th this season. So Chicago, they really struggle early on in this season. They had a long kind of winless run to start the season, and then I think week 6 when they moved up to 15, that was their first win. I think it was against Columbus, which they won 1-0, and then they immediately moved back down to 22nd because I think that week I probably put Chicago a little bit too high, and knowing that after they lose their next game, I had to put them very low because they have not been a very good team, and they're one of the worst team in the league right now, even though they're currently 7th in the Eastern Conference. And they did get a draw against Toronto last week, and I think they also got a surprising win against the Red Bulls back in week 8. So they're kind of back up there. And I think Chicago, for majority of the part, they were like near the bottom of the table. But in these last 2 games, because they got a surprising win on the road against the Red Bulls and get a draw at BMO Field against TFC, that's why they're starting to go back up a little bit. But still, this Chicago team is one of the worst teams in the league so far. But yeah, next up, Colorado. So they're currently in 9th place. They have a record of 2-2-3. They have 8 points so far this season. The highest they've gone in the power ranking is 16th. The lowest is the bottom, which is 23rd. And the average is 20.7. That is the lowest power ranking average out of all 23 teams in this power rankings. Now, Colorado started the season at 22nd, and then they moved up to 21st in week 1. Week 2, they moved back down to 23rd, and that's where they stay between week 2 to week 4. And then on week 5, they moved up to 22nd. Week 6, they moved up to 20th. Week 7 is where they moved up the highest at 16th. And in week 8, they moved down to 18th. And week 9, they are now at 19th, which is where they are right now. So for Colorado, I wouldn't say they have been really bad this season. They kind of had a little bit of a good run early on. The reason why they were near the bottom of the power rankings for so long was because they had a lot of off week, and I think they only had like one game. They only played one game through the first 4 games, and they have played the least amount of games out of any other team. So that's why they kind of got stuck in the bottom of the power rankings between that time. But then they started to move up because they got big resort against teams like TFC and Sporting KC, and unfortunately Colorado has started to kind of get back to reality after now back-to-back losses in these last 2 games. And yeah, they're back in 19th in the power rankings, and if they keep losing, then they're going to be finding themselves in that similar situation, which is right near the bottom of the power rankings. But Columbus, who is next, and this is going to be an interesting one to talk about. They currently are 4-2-3 this season. They currently have 14 points. The highest they have gone in the power rankings is actually 2nd, which is hard to believe, the fact that they were once that high in the power rankings. And the lowest they have gone is 15th, and the average in the power rankings is 8.2. So Columbus started the preseason power rankings in 10th. Then week 1 they moved up to 6th. Then week 2 they move up to 4th, and they stayed that way on week number 3. Then they move all the way up to 2nd in week 4, and then week 5 they move down to 6th. Week 6 is where they move down to 10th. Week 7 is where they are at the lowest at 15, and they were in that same spot for week number 8. And then on week 9 they move back up to 10th, and that is where they are right now. So the reason why I say it's very interesting for Columbus is that it's been a very kind of roller coaster ride for the first quarter of the season. I mean, they start the season just so hot, and were one of the best team in the league, but then they started to have a losing streak that, judging by the power rankings, you can tell it start happening in week 5, and then they just keep losing, cannot get anything going. And I think they also had a 4-game winless streak, and then eventually last week when they beat San Jose, that was when they ended that long winless streak and get themselves back in the top 10 of the power rankings. But I think Crew fans should be happy in terms of how this season has gone, considering the fact that since in the beginning of the season, knowing that they're not going to have 2 of their best players from last season, that is Justin Merrim and Ola Kamara on their team anymore, it looked like it was going to be a regress year. But it looks like Columbus is doing just fine right now, although lately it has not gone well at all. It's been a little bit of problems so far, and even beating San Jose, they had to rely on an 85th minute goal to beat them. So we'll see how Columbus is gonna do throughout the next couple of weeks. And yeah, next up is DC United. So DC United currently 1, 2, and 4. They're currently 10th in the Eastern Conference. They have 5 points in this season. Their highest they have gone is 17. The lowest is the bottom, which is 23rd, and their average is 20th, which is the second worst in terms of the power rankings. So they start off the power rankings preseason with a 17th place there, and then for week 1 they moved down to 18th. Week 2 they moved down to 20th. They stay that way in week 3. Then they moved down to 22nd in week 4, and then they moved down to the basement for week 5 and week 6, and then they moved up to 17 for week 7. They stayed the same way at there for week number 8, and then at present day they are back at the basement in 23rd place. And really, when you look at that kind of stats with what they have gone through in the power rankings, it's pretty clear that this is a really bad team. And you know, DC United, the probably the high point of their season was, I think, back in week number 7 when they beat Columbus at home somehow in some way, 1-0, despite the fact that they were down to 10 men. But other than that, you know, it has been just... Well, actually, the other high point was they came back from 2-0 down to drew 2-2 against Houston. But other than that, there's not a lot of highlights for DC United fans to kind of enjoy this season. And it's kind of expected from DC United that this is going to be another rough season for them, because they just they didn't really get anybody to... I mean, besides the fact that they got Yamil Assad, which he hasn't really been a big impact for DC United. Certainly not as big as they thought he would this season, but so far, you know, at least they can say that at least they finally got a win. I mean, that I think maybe that would be the only good thing so far this season for DC United. But yeah, next up, FC Dallas, who are currently 4th in the Western Conference. They currently have a record of 3-3-1. They have 12 points this season. Their highest in the power rankings was 7th, and the lowest that they're in the power rankings is 21st, and the average is 15.2. And actually, I made a mistake here. Their highest is actually not 7th. I'm going to grab my pen right here. Their highest is actually 6, because I just realized, looking at the Excel sheet where I put all the teams and all the power rankings from the first 9 weeks, I just realized that there was a 6 somewhere around there. So FC Dallas started their power rankings in the preseason at 16th, then they dropped down to 19th, and they stay at there for the first 3 weeks, and then they moved themselves up to 21st, or actually not move them up, they moved themselves down to 21st, and then move up to 18th on week 5. They stay at the same place for week number 6, and they made a dramatic jump on week number 7 where they moved up to 9th, and then week 8 is where I saw the number 6, and that is where they are the highest in the power rankings, and they just recently moved down to 7th in week number 9. So one of the reasons that I put Dallas so low in the power rankings, despite the fact for a long time, and they were the last team to stay unbeaten this season, is because those first couple of games, you know, even though they were undefeated, they had a lot of draw in those games, and those first couple of games were all at home against very mediocre kind of team. And the fact that they couldn't really get maximum points for most of those games, I think they only got maximum point out of their first 4 games only once, and Yeah, that is the reason why I put them so low in the power rankings, because it just felt like they could have easily done more for the first couple of weeks, and now the fact that they are in this really murderous road that they are on, um, I wouldn't be surprised that they're going to be right near the basement again. The reason why I finally moved them up so high is because they started to prove that they can win games on the road, and they have been some very good team on the road too. But having said that, now that they have a very tough stretch, and they already lost to NYCFC last week, and now they have to play LAFC next, and that is another away game. And I know that they still have Toronto, and also they still have to play LAFC again at home. It's gonna be very interesting to see what's gonna happen with Dallas, and if they go on a really tough stretch in this really tough schedule, then they are going to be where they were in the first couple of weeks. But yeah, next up, Houston. Currently 8th in the Western Conference. They have a record of 2-2-3. They have 8 points so far this season. Their highest in the power rankings was 7th. The lowest was 17th. And the average so far is 11.8 in terms of the power rankings. So Houston started the preseason power rankings at 14th. Then they jumped all the way up to 7th. And ever since that, they dropped down to 10th on week number 2, dropped down to 11th for week number 3, then go back up to 10th for week number 4, then drop all the way down to 15th, which is the lowest they are. Or actually, no, scratch that. That is actually not the lowest that they are. Week 6, or not week 6, but week 9 is actually the lowest. The currently right now with Houston is the lowest that they are. But for week number 6, they moved up to 13th, and then for week number 7, they moved up to 12th, and then week number 8, they actually moved themselves all the way up to 9th, and then currently they took a massive drop on week 9 power rankings, and currently in 17th place. And really for Houston, it's been a bit of a rough stretch that they've been going through in the last couple of weeks. I mean, they got that very unexpected win against Atlanta, and they thought that they were going to send a message to the rest of the league that they were for real again. Well, it turns out that wasn't the case, because from that game all the way to the TFC game that they played a couple of weeks ago, they did not get all 3 points at all. They had that very long winless run, and somehow I haven't put them down very kind of low in the power rankings, because they did get a couple of draws or not at home, but they got a couple of draw on the road, but at the same time they also got a couple of draw at home, and also a couple of losses at home, which is a place that they just never lose. So for Houston right now, and last week when they lose last week, I forgot who it was. Oh yeah, it was Minnesota that they lost last week. That was probably the low point of Houston. I mean, Houston is just kind of regressing this year, which is kind of expected, because a couple of their key players from last season were playing out of their mind, and they're starting to regress this year. And 2, they lost a couple of key guys from last year. And 3, they also have some injuries that they are dealing with right now. So yeah, that's where Houston is right now in 17 the power rankings, and currently 8th right now in the standings. And then up next, it's the Galaxy, who are currently 5th in the Western Conference. They currently have a record of 3-1-4. They have 10 points. The highest they have gone was 5th, and the lowest they gone is 13th, and their average is 9.5. So the Galaxy started the power rankings on 13th, then they jump up to 12th, then they move back down to 13th, and then they jump up to 9th, then jump up to 8th the following week, and then jump up to the highest position from week 5, which is number 5, and then week 6 they move back down to 7, move back up again for week number 7, and then on week 8 they dropped down to 11, and it is pretty much the same case again for week number 9. And for the Galaxy, they started the season pretty strongly, but recently they have had a bit of a struggle, and just like last season where they just cannot figure out StubHub Center for whatever reason, and that they're like the only team that just cannot win at home, it is the same case once again this season. I mean, they have now lost 3 straight at home, and there is definitely problem for the Galaxy so far. And I think they were also at one point second in the standing, but because of the fact that the last couple of games that they've been at home and how they lost all of them, they are started to falling down the Western Conference a little bit. And if they continue to lose, then they are going to fall down the power ranking. I'm surprised how doing these bad run I haven't moved them down even lower, because, well, I think the last game against the Red Bulls, the reason why I did not move them down even lower than 11th was that they really got robbed in that game, and that they should have got a draw at that one. But it is what it is. They need to really kind of regroup themselves, and yeah. Meanwhile, let's talk about their neighbors, LAFC, who is the kind of like the opposite of what the Galaxy have gone through. I mean, it's been an incredible season for LAFC. They're 5-0-2. They currently have 15 points. The highest they've been in the power rankings was 4th. The lowest was 18th, but that was back in the first week, or not the first week, but the kind of season power rankings, where there was a lot of unknown about LAFC, and then their average is 10.1. So like I said, the preseason they started at 18 because there was a lot of unknown. Then they move up to 16 in week 1, and then they made a dramatic boost of a move and go up to 7th place. Then they stay at the same place for week number 3. They drop down to 9th for week number 4, then drop down to 12th for week number 5, then drop down to 16th for week number 6, but then they move themselves all the way back up for week number 7 at 8th, and then week number 8 and 9th, and currently where they are right now is 4th in the power rankings. So, LAFC, the only tough patch that they had was between week number 5 and 6, and I think week 5 was the El Tráfico game where they just completely imploded and just blew a 3-0 lead against their neighboring LA Galaxy and lose 4-3. And then week number 6 was when they got absolutely destroyed by Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium 5-0. But other than that, it has been nothing but kind of happy feelings, and just an incredible run so far that LAFC has gone to start their first ever season in MLS and first ever season in history too. So yeah, so far they've been doing pretty good right now, although the question now is that can they keep this up, considering the fact that this team does not have a very kind of big squad. It is a very, very thin squad. But next up, Minnesota, who currently are 3-0-5. They currently have 9 points. The highest they have gone is 10th. The lowest is 23rd, and the average they have in the power rankings is 18.3. So Minnesota start the power rankings at the bottom in the preseason. They did move up to 22nd in week number 1. Then they moved up to 18 for week number 2, and then they moved up to 10th in week number 3. And then for week number 4, they move back down to 15, move back down to 19 for week 5 and 6, move back down to 21st for week number 7, and then they move up to 20th on week number 8, and just moved up to 16th in last week power rankings. And for Minnesota, it's been kind of a strange season for Minnesota, because on one point we have seen just the worst of Minnesota, but at some point we have seen probably the best of Minnesota. I mean, Minnesota right now, a team that is just dealing with back-breaking injury to their biggest star, but somehow they kind of been at times using that as kind of like a rally cry, which is why when they jumped all the way up to 10th, that was when they had like the 2-game winning streak, and that they were actually above 500 for the first time back in week number 3 in their club history. And recently they did get a big win against Houston, so they kind of jumped up a little bit. I mean, right now it's pretty much whenever Minnesota gets a big win, they jumped up pretty high in the power rankings, because you don't expect Minnesota to do what they do this season. Consider how they basically are just feeling a USL team right now, or not really a USL but an NASL team, which pretty much is a second tier team. But yeah, next up, Montreal. They are currently 2-0-6. They have 6 points this season. They're currently, or not they're currently, but the highest they are in the power rankings is 14th. The lowest is 22nd, and their average is 19.1 in terms of the power rankings. So Montreal, they start the power rankings in 20th, and then they stay at that same spot for week number 1. Then week number 2, they gone up to 21st. Week number 3, they're at 18th. They stay that same way for week number 4. Week number 5, they jump up to 14th. Week 6, they moved back down to 17th. Week 7, they were at 20th. Week 8, moved down to 21st. And then currently, they are in 22nd of the power rankings. So Montreal did had a bit of a good run early on the season, but ever since, it has not been a good run at all. It's been a very, very bad run. And really, Montreal is, alongside with the likes of DC United, Minnesota, and Colorado, are just probably the worst team right now in the league. And it also doesn't help the fact that the defense is just leaking so many goals right now from Montreal. So, yep. Next up, and probably the biggest surprise this season, New England, currently 4th in the power rankings. They are currently 4-2-2. They have 14 points this season. The highest they have gone is 5th. The lowest is at 23rd. I mean, I think this is probably the biggest high to low kind of ratio in terms of power rankings out of all 23 teams. And the average they have is 14.7. So New England start the season at 21st, and then they gone to the bottom on week number 1 at 23rd, and then they moved up 1 spot for week number 2 at 22nd. They stay at the same spot for week number 3, and then week number 4 they move up to 19th. Then week number 5 they move up to 10th. That was the biggest move that they had. Then they moved up to 8th for week 6. They move up to, or move down, back down to 10th in week number 7. Then they move up to 7th for week 8, and now currently in week number 9 they are at the highest, at 5th place in the power rankings. And it is absolutely remarkable how New England is doing this, considering the fact that early part of the season it was pretty much like, yep, this is what we expect New England. There probably is going to be a team that's going to lose, and also a team that's going to probably beat teams that are kind of like in the same category that they are. But ever since week number 5, they have been just on an absolute tear right now, and that this team is just, they have lost 1 or 2 games along the way, but New England is just, they are just on fire right now. And after that last win against Sporting KC, you can really say that New England is real, and that this team is going to compete this season in that really tough Eastern Conference. And I'm just hope that they won't just completely burn out later on. Hopefully they can just continue that good stretch, because right now a lot of people are still thinking that New England is going to eventually burn out after this very good start. But I'm for one that always want to cheer for the underdogs and want to see a team to have a very feel-good story, considering the fact that they probably would, in the beginning, nobody thought that they would be right where they are. And yeah, hopefully New England can keep up this good run. But the next team is a team that I shouldn't really say that it is really kind of like a feel-good story, because that's kind of what you expect what NYCFC is. They're currently top in the Eastern Conference and also top in the Supporter Shield, although there is a couple of teams that is right on their tail. Atlanta and Orlando City are just right there alongside them. They currently have a 6-2-1 record. They currently have 20 points this season. The only team that actually have more than 20 plus points this season. The highest that they have gone is first, which is a spot that they pretty much hold for a while. And then the lowest they have gone is fifth, which I believe it was just 2 weeks ago. And the average is 1.9 for them in the power rankings, which is the highest out of any other third team in the MLS. And they started the preseason power ranking in second, and then for week number 1 they jumped up to first, and they stayed that way until week number 6 when they temporarily moved down to third. But that was also the week where they did not play and that they had to move down because some of the team behind them actually won. And then week number 7 they moved back down to first, and then week 8 was the lowest position, which is fifth, because they lost their first game in that week. And then in week 9 they moved back up to third place after winning against Dallas last week. And NYCFC has they've been just such a consistent team this season, one of the more consistent team this season. And right now this team certainly could win the Supporter Shield, and certainly maybe the favorite to win the Supporter Shield right now. But as I said before in the preseason, it's not what the regular season is all about for NYCFC. I mean, NYCFC can do very well in the regular season, but there's always that lingering question in the playoffs, because that is when they just haven't really showed up right now. But we'll see how NYCFC will go through all the way. I think they'll probably be lingering right around that top 5 spot in the power rankings for a really long time. I don't really think that, unless they started to go on a really bad run, I don't think they will drop out of the top 10 of the power rankings. They're just that good right now. But now let's talk about their neighbor, New York Red Bulls. They currently have a 4-0-3 record. They're actually only 6th in the Eastern Conference. They have 12 points this season. The highest they've gone is 5th in the power rankings. The lowest is 13th. They average 8.1 in the power rankings. And for the Red Bulls, they started the season at 9th in the power rankings. Then they dropped down to 13th in the power rankings, but moved back up to 8th in week number 2. Then they stay that way for week number 3. Then they move up to 5th in week number 4, drop down to 7th in week number 5. In week number 6, they have 6. They move up to 6th in the power rankings, and then week 7 they move up to 5th, and then they drop down to 12th in week number 8, and then week number 9 they are currently right now at 8th in the power rankings. So the Red Bulls this season, I'm still very surprised the fact that they're only 6th in the Eastern Conference, because this team looked like one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference right now. They have incredible depth on their team, a lot of good young talent on their team, and if they could have probably done a little bit better on the road and did not just lose to Chicago at home for no reason whatsoever, then I think this team would have had a higher power ranking average. And remember, back in week 1 when they were at the lowest, that was because they didn't really play that week and all the other team around them won, so I had to move them down and whatnot. But other than that, the Red Bulls have been a consistent kind of top 10 teams. They're kind of right around that 5th to 10th spot for a majority of this season. And but next up, Orlando City. They currently have a 5-1-2 record. They currently have 16 points this season. The highest they have gone in the power rankings is Oh God, that is actually wrong. It's actually backwards. I got this backwards actually. The highest is actually second, and the lowest is actually 12. I don't know why I put them backwards, but yeah. Orlando City, they started the power rankings at 6, and then they moved up to 4th in the power rankings, but then moved down to 9th in the power rankings, then moved down to 12th for week number 3, move up 1 spot from week number 4, and then move up 3 spots for week number 5 to 8th, and then move up another 3 spots to 5th in week number 6, moved up 2 spots for week number 7 to 3rd, stay that way for week number 8, and then week number 9, they are currently now 2nd in the power rankings. And really, for Orlando City, if it wasn't for that really just bad start that they have, where they pretty much have everybody out in the first couple of weeks, and they just had a pretty much a reserve team for the first couple of weeks, this team has been one of the best team in the league, and they are just red hot right now with the longest winning streak in the league. And certainly this is kind of what you expect from Orlando City, considering the fact that they brought so many pieces. And I know some people will say, well, the only reason why Orlando City is that good is because they bought all those pieces. Well, just because you bought all these kind of big pieces to your team doesn't mean it's going to make an instant impact. And considering the fact that how Jason Christ coming into this season was just in such a hot pressure, and that somehow he's kind of like worked himself out of it, and now pretty much that hot seat that he was on for the first couple of weeks have just cooled so dramatically with this winning streak. I have a feeling that Orlando City is going to be right up there and potentially challenge for the Eastern Conference title, and maybe even sneak into the Supporters Shield conversation. I mean, they're only 4 points out of the Supporters Shield, and they just don't know how to lose right now. They're finding ways to win games. And yeah, this Orlando City team could definitely be a team that at the end of the year might be near the top 3 in the Eastern Conference. So from a very good team to now kind of a very bad team, and technically after tonight, this should say 4, because tonight, as I'm recording this, the TFC versus Philly game just ended, and Toronto won 3-0. So technically, this should say 2, 2, and 4. Philly currently have 8 points this season. Their highest is 13th, their lowest is 23rd, and the average is 18.7. So Philly, they started the preseason power rankings at 19th. They move up to 17th, and then they move up to 15th. Stay that way until week number 4, when they actually also moved up to 13th. But then this is when it went all wrong for them, and week number 5, they move all the way down to 21st. They stay at that same spot for week number 6. Week number 7, they were at 23rd, and that's where they were also for week number 8. And then week number 9, they have recently moved up to 20th. But I have a feeling for week number 10, they are probably going to be in 23rd right now. And for Philly, it's really sad to be a Union fan right now, because this team that they have is just bad. Like, this team cannot score. This team cannot defend. This team has just, the midfield is just absolute shambles right now. And it's quite miraculous, the fact that they were 13th at one point. And I think that was that kind of early run, that the only kind of good run that they kind of had. But ever since, it has been it's been disaster so far. And it definitely is not going to get any better. And, right now they're currently in 8th, but after this Toronto game, I think depending on what's going to happen in tomorrow's game and the team around them that plays on Saturday, they will drop down to 9th or 10th in the standings. Talking about another team that hasn't been having a good season, Portland, currently 10th in the Western Conference with 2 wins, 2 draws, and 3 losses. They currently have 8 points also. The highest they got in the power rankings was 7. The lowest was 22nd. The average was 14.7 for them in terms of the power rankings average. And for Portland, they started the season at 7th place, and then they moved down to 8th. Then they moved down to 14th. Then they moved down to 16th for week number 3. Stayed the same way for week number 4. And then week number 5, they moved even further down to 17th. And in week 6, that's when they just basically almost hit rock bottom to put themselves in 22nd in the power rankings. And then they move up to 19 for week number 7, moved up to 14 for week number 8, and that is where they also are currently for week number 9. So for Portland, recently they have done a little bit better, but my oh my, they start the season really, really bad. And most of that has to do with the fact that they were on the road for the first 5 games, and just Portland right now just cannot win on the road at all. It's been just so long since Portland has actually got a win on the road, and I'm praying that that will stay the same after tomorrow's game against the Quakes. But yeah, they definitely have some work to do right now if they want to make up for their poor start that they are off to. So next up is RSL, and I have a feeling that we're probably already up to like 30 minutes in this video. This is obviously going to be a long video considering the fact that I'm going through all 23 teams. So RSL is next. They currently have a 3-1-4 record. They have 10 points this season. Their highest in the power rankings was 8th. The lowest was 17th. The average they have is 11th in the power rankings average. So RSL start the season in 8th place, then they moved down to 9th in week 1, then they moved down to 17th in week number 2, and that was probably the game where they lost 5-1 at home against LAFC. Probably one of the most embarrassing opening day loss or home opener loss that you will ever see by any MLS teams. And then they moved themselves up to 13 for week number 3, moved themselves to 12 for week number 4, moved themselves to 11 for week number 5. Then they moved themselves up to 9th for week number 6, but moved down to 11 for week 7. Then they moved themselves up to 8th in week number 8, only to find themselves moved back down to 12th for week number 9. And that last couple of weeks where I talk about how they were up and down in the power rankings kind of sums up what RSL is right now. It has been just an up and down year for RSL. There's been time where they look good, there's been time that they look absolutely dreadful, and this is a team that also just cannot win on the road at all. And I think maybe I have to give a little bit sympathy considering the fact that both of some of their road games, I think there are 3 road games that they have, or 4 road games that they have this season, are teams like Dallas, Toronto, NYCFC, and Vancouver. And those places are definitely not easy place to win, except for maybe Vancouver. But yeah, it's been a very mediocre kind of year for RSL, and I think this power ranking average kind of says it too. 11th is right in the middle of that mediocrity line. But next up, it's time to talk about my team, the Quakes. They currently have a 1-2-4 record. They only have 5 points this season. Their highest on the power rankings is 11th. The lowest is 21st. The average is 15.3. And in terms of how they've done in the first 9 weeks of the power rankings, well, in the preseason power rankings, they were ranked 11th. They stayed that same way in week number 1. Then they dropped down to 12 on week number 3. Then they dropped down to 17 for week number 3. Then they moved up to 14 for week number 4. 5th week they moved down to 16th. Then they move up to 14th again for week number 6. Then they moved down to 18th for week number 7. Week number 8 they moved down to 19th, and then right now they are currently at the lowest in terms of the power rankings out of all the weeks so far. And really, it has been it kind of just says how this team early on, when I ranked them right around the middle part of the power rankings, and I thought this was a team that potentially might go up a little bit in the power rankings, despite the fact that we do have a very tough stretch to beginning of the season, and it turns out that wasn't the case. They have looked absolutely garbage right now, and you know, needless to say that our defense is just absolutely trash, and our midfield at times look good and at times look absolutely shambolic, and then our forward just cannot really put the ball into the back of the net a lot of the time. So yeah, it is sad to be a Quakes fan, but at least from what I know is, since tomorrow when we play against Portland, and that one, I'm really praying that we can finally end this really long winless run that we have, which I think is probably the longest winless run we have out of all 23 teams. That we can build some momentum in these next couple of weeks, because we have probably the easiest stretch out of our entire season in this next couple of games and in May. So talking about struggling teams, another team that is also struggling, and this is a controversial kind of power rankings thing, because if you look at it, it doesn't really reflect on how bad Seattle is. But they're currently 1-4 this season. They have 4 points this season, which I believe they're actually tied with TFC with the worst points, or the least amount of points out of all 23 teams in MLS. The highest they've gone is 5th. The lowest they've gone is 13th, and their average is 9.3 for a team that has a very, very low point total and are bottom of the Western Conference. So Seattle started the power rankings at 5th, and they stayed that way until week number 4, despite the fact that they were losing and drawing games at that time. Then they moved down to 7 for week number 4. They moved down to 13 for week number 5, 12 in week number 6, 13th again for week 7 and 8, and then right now they are currently at its lowest. And again, I made a mistake here. It's actually not 13, it's 15. Man, I should have just double checked when I did this before I actually pressed the record button. But yeah, it's been kind of controversial for me to always put Seattle that high, because I have heard a lot of people that say that I rank Seattle way too high and that Seattle is actually absolute trash. And in some way I do agree, but the reason why I've been saying that they've been ranking pretty high in the power rankings despite the fact that they are just ranking very low is that at times Seattle has looked pretty decent, and you gotta also remember they were in the CCL for the first couple of weeks and they were battling just numerous injury in this team, and you know that's pretty much the benefit of the doubt of why they were ranked very high. And it goes the same with TFC when I get to this point. And yeah, that's why that is pretty much the main reason why I rank Seattle very high, and that's a lot of people would kind of disagree with me, consider how bad they are right now in the standing and the point total. But yeah, from the worst team in the Western Conference, the best team in the Western Conference, and that of course is Sporting KC, who has a 5-2-2 record. They have 17 points so far this season. They have gone as high as 2nd in the power rankings and as low as 6th, and their average is only 3.1. And for Sporting KC, they start the week at 4th in the power rankings, and then week 1 they jump up to 2nd. They stay at that same place until week number 4 when they drop down to 4th. Then they move up to 3rd for week number 5. Then they move back up to 2nd for week number 6. Then they move down to 4th in week number 7. Then move up back down to 2nd in week number 8. And they're currently at the lowest in terms of the power rankings on week number 9. And their average is 3.1. So like what I said about NYCFC and Atlanta, Sporting KC have been a very consistent team in terms of my power rankings. You know, at times I already said that Sporting KC is probably the only team that I can say that potentially can compete with the likes of Atlanta and NYCFC. Well, now that LAFC is starting to get a little bit hot, maybe that is another team that can potentially compete with those juggernaut in the East. And yeah, it's been a pretty impressive season so far for Sporting KC, but just like NYCFC, the question is, what's going to happen when they get into the playoffs? Because you know that Sporting KC is a team that has been struggling in the playoffs and just completely flop once they get into the big dance. So we're going to see how they're going to do when they get into the playoffs later this season. And we got two more teams left. I know this has been a really long video. If you're still watching this, I appreciate you still watching this video, even though it's just super long. But TFC currently in 11th, and they currently only have 4 points. Their record is 1-1-4. The highest they've gone was 1st, and the lowest they've gone is 10th, and the average score is 5.3 in terms of the power rankings. So they start the preseason top in the power rankings, but then they drop down to 3rd for week number 1, drop down to 6 on week number 3, and then drop down to or not drop down, but move up to 4th for week number 5, then drop down once again to 7th for week number 7, then move up to or drop down to 10th, which is the lowest they have gone on week number 8, and then week number 9 they made up 1 spot. And I have a feeling because Toronto won, they probably might be moving up back near the top 5 area. And like I said about Seattle, the reason why I rank them very high in the power rankings despite how poor they are so far in the league is because they've been just purely focused on CCL. Like, they basically at times put their reserve squad in here and put their affiliate team TFC2 in this, and their affiliate team, since TFC does not have a very good farm system, their affiliate team, once they play against these other MLS teams, they got absolutely trashed. But the reason why I don't put them down is because that's not the real TFC team. That was just their affiliates team. But yeah, finally, we get to Vancouver, who are currently 4-1-4 in this season in terms of their records. They have 13 points this season. They are currently, or not currently, but their highest is 9th in the power rankings. The lowest they have gone is 22nd in the power rankings, and they're averaging 14.6. That is actually a 6, not a 0 for anyone that is confused with that. And for Vancouver, I am just really surprised the fact that they are still 3rd in the Western Conference. Consider how bad they have been in these last couple of weeks. And also I forgot to talk about how they've been through for the first 9 weeks. So Vancouver, they were at 15th to start the power rankings in the preseason. Then they stay at that same spot for week number 1. They move up to 11th for week number 2. Then move down to 14th for week number 3. Then they move down to 17th for week number 4. And then they move up to 9th in week number 5. Week number 6, they move down to 11th. Week 7, they move down to 14th. Week 8, they drop all the way down to 22nd. And then week 9, they move up to 18th in the standings. And like I said about how somehow they're still in 3rd place, I think the only reason why Vancouver are in 3rd place right now is that they're really, really good on the road this season. Apart from that Sporting KC massacre, where that was just a complete outlier of how good Vancouver are this season on the road. And, at home, they have not looked good at all. Despite the fact that in the last game when they won 2-0, that was a very kind of scrappy wins for them. And the only other win was that first game where they beat Montreal 2-1, and that game wasn't really a pretty game also. So yeah, Vancouver, I don't know how they're still in 3rd place, which kind of sums up how bad the Western Conference is compared the Eastern Conference, because you have teams like Vancouver and Dallas and LA and RSL that are just so mediocre, and if you put them in the East, they would not be anywhere where they are currently in the Western Conference. But yes, that is pretty much it for my kind of quarterly review of all 23 teams according to the power rankings. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of your team, how your team have done throughout the quarter mark of this season, and what do you think is going to happen for the next quarter mark when we get to halfway. I'm going to do the same video that is going to be like this for the halfway point of the season. And yeah, hope you guys enjoy this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button, and I will see you guys next time.